Your brain is shrinking. Not from age, not from screens. Your brain, the human brain, the organ that built language and cities and everything you have ever known, is physically smaller than the brain your ancestors carried. For most of the story you were told, the human brain only ever grew, bigger and bigger across millions of years. Smarter apes becoming smarter humans. Skull after skull swelling toward the present. That is the arc you learned in school. And at the very end of it, it is wrong. Because somewhere in the last 20,000 years, the trend quietly reversed. Your skull started getting smaller. And almost nobody talks about it. How much smaller? Roughly 10%. That is not a rounding error. That is a chunk of brain about the size of a tennis ball, gone from the average human head in the blink of an evolutionary eye. Your ancestors 20,000 years ago were walking around with more brain than you have right now. Let that sit for a second. You are the descendant. You are supposed to be the upgrade. So why did the upgrade come with less? To understand this, you have to look at bone. The brain itself rots away within weeks of death, but the skull that held it survives for tens of thousands of years. And the space inside that skull, what scientists call cranial capacity, is simply the volume where the brain used to sit. Measure enough skulls across enough time, and you can watch the brain rise and fall like a tide. That is exactly what the anthropologist Machi Henneberg did. He gathered skull measurements spanning the Holocene, which is just the name for the warm stretch of the last 12,000 years after the final ice age ended. And the pattern he found was undeniable. Across that window, average human cranial capacity dropped. Not in one population, not in one place. Everywhere he looked. Other researchers found the same thing. The paleoanthropologist John Hawkes has pointed out that the shrinkage is large, fast, and global, faster in fact than the brain ever grew. The human brain spent 2 million years inflating. It has spent the last several thousand deflating at a sprint. And here's the part that should unsettle you. The biggest brains in the human family were not ours at all. The Neanderthals, your thick-boned cousins who hunted mammoths through Ice Age Europe, carried brains as large as yours or larger. The early modern humans who painted the walls of Chauvet Cave in France, the ones who carved bone flutes and buried their dead with care, had brains noticeably bigger than the average human alive today. These were not primitive creatures. They were you, with more gray matter. So picture one of them. It is roughly 20,000 years ago. The world is colder, drier, emptier of people. You are crouched at the mouth of a cave, scraping fat from a hide with a stone blade your own hands shaped. You know the name of every plant on the hillside. You can read a smear of disturbed grass and tell what animal passed, how long ago, and whether it was limping. You hold the entire map of your world inside your skull, because there is nowhere else to keep it. That person needed a big brain. Every single thing they relied on to survive lived in their own head. No books, no writing, no specialists to remember things for them. If a piece of knowledge was lost, it was lost with the person who died holding it. So why, when life arguably got easier, did the brain that mastered all of that begin to disappear? This is where the story splits, and where the honest answer is that scientists are still arguing. But the leading ideas are more interesting than any tidy myth. The first idea is timing. In 2021, the anthropologist Jeremy De Silva and his colleagues, including the biologist James Traniello, published a study in the journal Frontiers in Ecology and Evolution, arguing that the brain did not shrink slowly and steadily. It dropped, they proposed, relatively recently, possibly within the last several thousand years, right around the time complex societies and writing were taking hold. Their argument leaned on a strange and beautiful comparison: ants. In ant colonies where the group shares the work of thinking and remembering, individual ants can get by with smaller brains because the colony itself becomes the mind. Their suggestion was that something similar happened to us. Now, be fair to the science. Other researchers pushed back hard on that exact timing, arguing the data was thinner than it looked. The debate is real and unfinished. But the underlying idea that a brain can shrink when the burden of remembering gets shared did not go away. It points at something deep. Think about what changed for your ancestors. They stopped each carrying the whole world alone. Knowledge moved out of single skulls and into the group. One person remembered the hunting routes, Another remembered the healing plants. Another remembered the stories that held the tribe together. Then came farming, villages, trade, and eventually marks scratched into clay that could remember for you even after you were dead. The moment you can store knowledge outside your own head, you no longer need to grow a bigger one to hold it. There is a second idea, and it is even stranger. It is called self-domestication. Researchers like Richard Wrangham and Brian Hare have spent years on a simple, haunting observation. When humans tame an animal, when we breed dogs from wolves or cattle from wild oxen, something predictable happens over generations. The animal becomes friendlier, calmer, less aggressive. Its face softens, its body becomes more delicate, and its brain gets smaller. A dog has a smaller brain than a wolf. A domesticated animal, again and again, shrinks. The unsettling proposal is that we did this to ourselves, that over thousands of years, the humans who were calmer, more cooperative, better at living crammed together without killing each other, were the ones who survived and had more children. We bred ourselves, slowly, for tolerance. And we may have come out the far side of that process the same way every tamed animal does. Lighter bones, softer faces, smaller brains. That is the word anthropologists use for the lighter skeleton, by the way. Gracile. It simply means delicate, less rugged. Your whole body, not just your head, became more gracile than your Ice Age ancestors. You are a softer, smoother, smaller-brained version of the human that came before. So here's the twist you did not see coming. A smaller brain did not make you dumber. By every measure that matters, the species got more capable as the individual brain got smaller. We built mathematics, medicine, machines, and global networks of cooperation, all while the average head was shrinking. How is that possible? Because intelligence stopped living only inside one's skull. It spread out. It became something you share, something stored in language, in writing, in other people, in tools. You did not lose your mind. You distributed it. And that should sound deeply familiar, because you are doing it right now, more aggressively than any human in history. When did you last memorize a phone number? You don't. Your phone holds it. When did you last navigate a city from memory? You don't. A map in your pocket thinks for you. Facts you would once have carried in your head for life are now a thumb swipe away, so your brain, sensibly, lets them go. You have outsourced enormous amounts of remembering to glass and silicon, and you barely noticed it happening. This is the exact same move your ancestors made when they pushed knowledge out of their skulls and into the tribe, into the story, into the written word. You are the latest chapter of a process that is tens of thousands of years old. The brain offloads what it does not need to carry alone. The difference is only the speed. Your ancestors did it over 100 generations. You did it in 20 years. So the next time someone tells you the modern world is making people stupid, remember the skulls. Remember that the largest human brains belong to people who had nothing but their own minds to rely on, and that as we learn to think together, to store our knowledge outside ourselves, the lonely burden on each individual skull got lighter, and the brain, ever efficient, let some of itself go. Your brain is shrinking. It always has been, for as long as you have had other people to think alongside. And maybe that is not a warning at all. Maybe it is the quiet proof that you were never meant to carry the whole world inside one head, and that the most human thing your brain ever learned to do was to trust the minds around it to hold the rest.